December 1st, 1948. Australia was waking up to summer, but on Somerton Beach in Adelaide, the morning sun revealed something chilling. There he was, a man, slumped against the seawall, his legs stretched out before him. His feet crossed neatly at the ankles like he was simply resting. To the few early walkers who passed, it almost looked like he had dozed off while watching the waves. But when one woman approached and nudged him with concern, the truth set in. He wasn't breathing. He was cold, dead. No blood, no wounds, no signs of a struggle. Just a well-dressed man in a crisp suit, polished shoes, and a clean shave. He looked respectable, even refined. But what unsettled the authorities wasn't just how he died. It was who he was, because no one knew. His clothes had all the labels carefully cut out. No wallet, no identification, no train ticket, no hotel stub, no cigarette case, nothing that might say his name. Even the tailor's marks were gone, like someone had gone out of their way to erase his past. The coroner noted something strange. His pupils were unusually small, almost pinpoint size. His spleen was enlarged. His stomach was full of blood, and tucked inside a small, hidden pocket sewn into the waistband of his trousers was a tiny, rolled-up scrap of paper. On it, two chilling words, Tamam Shud. It was Persian. Translated, it meant, "It is finished." From that moment, the case stopped being about a dead man on a beach. It became a mystery that would haunt Australia for decades, and the world. The media quickly dubbed him the Somerton Man, but that name meant nothing. The man remained a ghost, and ghosts don't rest easy. In the days following the discovery of the body, the Somerton Man quickly became front-page news across Australia. Who was he? Why was he there? And why did someone go to such extraordinary lengths to erase his identity? Police began the painstaking process of trying to trace the man's past. They took fingerprints, photographs, dental records. They scoured missing persons reports from every Australian state. They even reached out to foreign embassies. Nothing matched. Meanwhile, the man's belongings, or lack thereof, raised more questions. His suit was of high quality, but oddly, the stitching suggested it had been tailored in America, not Australia. His shoes were custom-made. His hands were soft. No calluses, no signs of manual labor. This wasn't a drifter. This was someone who'd once lived comfortably, maybe even with privilege. A few days later, a breakthrough, or what they thought might be one, came from Adelaide railway station. In an unclaimed locker, officers found a brown suitcase that had been checked in on November 30th, the day before the man was discovered. Inside, they found a mix of items: a shaving kit, a screwdriver, a pair of pajamas, a coat stitched with a rare kind of orange thread not sold in Australia, a sharp pair of scissors, a stenciling brush, a pair of slippers, a light brown pullover. Like the man's clothes, every label had been cut out. The only hint? A name found faintly marked inside the case, T. Keane. But just when investigators hoped they'd found their lead, it crumbled. No one named T. Keane was missing, and curiously, the items labeled Keane seemed planted. None matched the man's body or clothing, as if they were meant to mislead. Even the cause of death was elusive. The toxicology report found no poisons in his system, no heart attack, no stroke, nothing definitive. The coroner was forced to declare the cause of death as unknown. But the case was about to get even stranger, because someone else had seen that phrase Tamam Shud before, and it would take them down a rabbit hole of codes, spies, and secrets. Just as the investigation into the Somerton Man appeared to stall, fate intervened, in the most unexpected way. Months had passed since the body was discovered. The public had begun to forget, moving on to other headlines. But one man, a local pharmacist named John Freeman, hadn't stopped thinking about the case, especially about that strange piece of paper, Tamam Shud. Freeman remembered something odd that had happened on the very day the body was found. His car had been parked near Somerton Beach. He'd left it unlocked. When he returned later that evening, he noticed a crumpled book lying in the back seat, the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. He assumed someone had accidentally dropped it or left it behind. But when the newspapers printed the phrase Tamam Shud, it struck him. He rushed to the police. Inside the last page of the book, torn neatly from its binding, was the very same scrap of paper that had been found in the dead man's pocket. The missing page, the exact same font, the torn edge matched perfectly. Suddenly, the anonymous man on the beach was connected directly to this strange, forgotten copy of a centuries-old Persian poem. But there was more. On the back cover of the book, scribbled faintly in pencil, were 5 lines of letters. Random, confusing, possibly nonsense. Gobabt, Liawi, Dimpinip, Mliaboayak, Imsamsgab. Was it a code? Cryptographers from the military were brought in. Intelligence agencies studied the letters. Nothing matched any known code format. But they agreed on one thing: this wasn't gibberish. The repeated letters and structure suggested it was meaningful. Possibly a one-time cipher, which meant it could only be cracked with a key, and that key might have died with the Somerton Man. As if that weren't enough, something else was found in the book. A phone number. It led to a woman living just blocks from Somerton Beach. Her name was Jestin. The phone number scribbled inside the back cover of the Rubaiyat led detectives to a woman named Jo Thompson, though she was known by her friends as Jestin. She lived in a modest house in Glenelg, just a 5-minute walk from where the Somerton Man's body had been found. She was a nurse, private, polite, soft-spoken. When detectives knocked on her door, she didn't seem surprised. They asked if she recognized the book. She said no. They showed her the man's face. That's when everything changed. Witnesses who were present during the interview later described an eerie shift in her demeanor. Her hands trembled. She turned pale. Her voice, which had been composed just moments earlier, began to quiver. But when the detectives asked again if she knew the man, she firmly said, "No, I've never seen him before." Still, her reaction was impossible to ignore. Something in her eyes, a flicker of recognition she couldn't hide. The detectives pressed further. She eventually admitted that during World War II, she had given a copy of the Rubaiyat to a man she once knew, Alf Boxall, an army lieutenant she had worked with while stationed in Sydney. They had exchanged poetry and conversations during long, quiet shifts. Could Alf Boxall be the Somerton Man? Excited by the potential break, detectives rushed to locate Boxall. But the case took another strange turn. They found him, alive, living in Sydney. He still had the copy of the Rubaiyat that Jestin had given him. It even contained a handwritten dedication, in her handwriting, and a verse she had underlined. "Indeed, indeed, repentance oft before I swore. But was I sober when I swore?" So, if the Somerton Man wasn't Boxall, who was he? And why did Jestin react like that? Some investigators theorized that the man might have been in love with her, or spying on her. Others wondered if he was the father of her son. Because there was one more detail that couldn't be ignored. Jestin had a young boy, and he bore an uncanny resemblance to the dead man. For decades, the case remained a knot of riddles, unanswered questions, dead ends, and haunting coincidences. The book, the code, the nurse, the poisoned man with no name. Then, nearly 70 years later, a new generation of investigators decided to unearth the truth, literally. In 2021, after years of public pressure and a persistent push from forensic scientist Derek Abbott, South Australian authorities finally gave the green light to exhume the Somerton Man's body. They wanted to test his DNA. The grave had been sealed since 1949, marked with a small plaque. "Here lies the unknown man who was found at Somerton Beach." No one knew what condition his remains would be in. But to their surprise, the bones were remarkably well preserved. Carefully, respectfully, they were removed and taken to a high-security lab. What they hoped to extract wasn't just bone dust. It was identity, connection, truth. Dr. Abbott and a team of genetic genealogists, using the most advanced forensic technology available, began building a DNA profile from hair strands found in the plaster bust taken of the man in 1949. The process was slow, painstaking, but with each marker they uncovered, the unknown man was being pulled back from the shadows. And then a hit, In early 2022, the team traced the Somerton Man's DNA to an American couple who had emigrated to Australia in the 19th century. From there, they followed branches of the family tree, generation after generation, slowly narrowing down the possibilities. Finally, they landed on a name, Carl Charles Webb. Born in 1905 in Melbourne, an electrical engineer by trade, a man who had gone missing around the time the body appeared. He was not a spy. He had no criminal record, but he was deeply troubled, recently separated from his wife, and, according to family records, had completely dropped off the radar after 1947. The mysterious man on the beach was not a foreign agent or a jilted lover. He was Carl Webb, a forgotten man from suburban Melbourne. But if he wasn't murdered, why did he die? And what did Justin have to do with it? Carl Webb, a name that meant little to the world, but everything to the mystery. The discovery sent shockwaves through the true crime community. Newspapers around the world ran headlines. Somerton Man identified after 73 years. DNA cracks Australia's most enduring cold case. But even with a name, the questions didn't end. If Carl Webb wasn't a spy, why the secret code? If he wasn't murdered, why the poison? If he wasn't connected to Jessica Thompson, why was her number in his book? As the DNA findings made headlines, investigators began revisiting everything with fresh eyes, this time with context. Carl Webb was an engineer, highly intelligent, curious. He also had a background in electrical equipment and code systems, which may explain the cipher in the Rubaiyat. But he also had something else in his past, mental health struggles. According to private family accounts and court records, Carl had suffered from episodes of instability. He was believed to be dealing with relationship issues, isolation, and deepening depression in the months before he vanished. What if, some wondered, the Rubaiyat wasn't a message to someone else, but a final message to himself? Investigators now believe Carl may have traveled to Adelaide in a state of emotional collapse, possibly seeking out someone from his past. Maybe even Jessica Justin Thompson. Remember, the Rubaiyat was a book Jessica had given to Alf Boxall, a man she once loved. The same book Carl had. The same phrase underlined. Tamam Shud. It is ended. It was no longer a spy story. It was something more human, more tragic. One theory is that Carl Webb, heartbroken and adrift, traveled to Adelaide in search of someone. Possibly Jessica. But she had moved on, had a family, a new life. Carl may have accepted the rejection, left the book in her car, then walked to Somerton Beach, and chose to end his life in solitude with poetry in his pocket. It wasn't the mystery people expected, but perhaps it was the answer that fit. The mystery of the Somerton Man haunted generations. But in the end, it wasn't solved by spy agencies or secret codes, not by forensics or coroners, not even by the police. It was solved by a retired professor, a worn-out suitcase, and strands of fragile 70-year-old hair. Carl Charles Webb had no idea that decades after his quiet death, the world would still be whispering his name. Even with his identity confirmed, questions lingered like ghosts. What exactly was his connection to Jessica Thompson? Did she recognize him when the police came to her door all those years ago? Why had she asked the officer never to reveal her name in public? And why did her son, Robin, who may have been Carl's own child, share such unusual traits, like the rare ear shape and the dancer's calves? Was Carl Webb simply a broken man, wandering in the shadow of lost love? Or did Jessica know far more than she ever admitted? Jessica passed away in 2007, taking her secrets with her. Robin died in 2009, never knowing he might be the son of the Somerton Man. Carl was buried under the label Unknown for over 7 decades. Now his grave bears his true name, but the story, still unfinished. The greatest tragedy wasn't the death itself. It was that nobody came looking for him. No missing persons report, no family inquiry, no friend asking questions. In a world of millions, Carl Webb vanished, and no one noticed. He became a footnote in forensic textbooks, a curiosity in criminal circles, But behind the enigma was a man who loved poetry, who may have loved deeply, and who, at some point, lost himself. His body lay by the ocean. His heart may have been broken long before. Professor Derek Abbott, the man who pushed the investigation forward with unwavering persistence, summed it up best. We may never know everything Carl went through, but we gave him back his name. That matters. And it does. Because no one deserves to vanish without a trace. No one deserves to become a puzzle piece, forgotten on a cold steel table. Not Carl. Not anyone. In the end, the Somerton Man was not a spy, a criminal, or a ghost. He was someone who hurt, who wandered, and who, at the very end, chose silence. But silence isn't the end. Not anymore. Carl's grave now reads, Carl Webb, 1905 to 1948. Tamam Shud. It is ended, but the story isn't really over. Because now that we know his name, we can finally ask the right questions. And we can remember him not as a cold case, but as a man. Carl Webb is no longer a mystery. He was a man. Flawed, forgotten, and finally found. Like this video, subscribe to the channel.